Okay, I have pressed the button. Let's see if it's up. Anyway, how you doing, Matt? Oh, just yeah. So while this is going down, while I check the stream stuff, what you went on holiday, which is why we haven't been streaming the last couple weeks. What's been going on there? How was that?
Holidays were absolutely wonderful. So I went away to the Gold Coast to get a little bit of time away from Canberra, and I happened to go to the Batman exhibition at Movie World on the Gold Coast. And they had a series of props all the way from the Michael Keaton era through to the unfortunate Joel Schumacher era, and then finishing out on the wonderful Christopher Nolan era. That being said, I did get to see Jim Carrey's sparkly uniform from Batman Forever and the full Mr. Freeze suit from the unfortunate Batman and Robin. So, you know, that, although while I'm not a fan of those films, it is nice to see, you know, those amazing props. Because Arnold Schwarzenegger's suit is being preserved quite well. It actually looks really, really cool. So,
yeah, nice.
you know, and Arnie's an absolute champion. You know, he may be a little bit of a rambunctious fellow when it comes to having sex with his maids. That being said, he also is a very progressive dude, and I think is a really good voice in America at the moment. Did you see his Ukrainian video?
I did. Yes, it was pretty. It was surprisingly good, actually.
Yeah.
But yeah, anyway, like we can forget about that. The stream has started, by the way, so we're good to go. If you can say
We're
something in
live.
the YouTube chat, I will make you a moderator. I think that's one of the issues that we had the first week where you tried to post a link and it didn't show up is because you didn't have any powers. You were just a pleb in YouTube chat. So
hello. There we go.
Cool. Okay, so this week has been a lot of like it's actually been incredible. The level of spin that the Liberal Party and the media have been employing. I have not seen it like this in a long, like forever. And so I think the best way to tackle it is probably just to go about things chronologically. So the first, I can't remember exactly when this happened this week, but there was all these like bullying allegations because Kimberly Kitching died. And then the media went into a goddamn frenzy and were like, oh, Labour, maybe you should do something about this. As if they don't have like processes and stuff in place already, much more than the Liberal Party do. And I'll let you talk about this a little bit, but I just want to like showcase the media environment that we are currently living in, okay? So here is Matt's head's blocking it. Okay, I'll move him. Here we have a title for a Sky News video hosted by Peter Credlin, and it says, progressive media target Kimberly Kitching. Oh, wait, no, shit. I did this in the wrong order. Okay, so this one is Sky News, and they're trying to do, quote-unquote, balanced journalism. And they're like, progressive media target Kimberly Kitching in cruel and unbalanced journalism. And I'm like, that's a very interesting thing for you to put up, Sky News, considering this goddamn video that you've put up that says Kimberly Kitching, quote, hounded to her death, unquote, by Labour. Do you consider this title to be fair and balanced journalism? Like, Jesus fucking Christ. So anyway, that's Sky News for you. And like, again, you don't even really need to look at the videos themselves because it's Sky News and they're partisan hacks. So yeah, that's what I kind of wanted to talk about. Matt, why don't you say your piece on this issue? Because I think you have a more nuanced view of what's actually going down.
Look, I totally agree with you. You know, we are in the middle of spin city at the moment. And the reason for that is that we are approaching an election. The Labor Party has been absolutely dominating as far as polling goes. We're going to talk about that at the end of the show. But they are trying to find anything and everything that they can to attack the Labor Party because they are doing so well in the polls. And it looks like they are, pretty poised to win the federal election. I'm hesitant, of course, to be too comfortable, especially considering that Bill Shorten was ahead in the polls, nearly 4 years ago. Now, this particular issue, first and foremost, it's absolutely tragic when someone loses their lives. When it came to the senator, she died at a very young age, in her 50s is not a great, I think it's still young to die. And she died of a heart attack. Now, there were accusations within the Labor Party that she had been bullied, and the reason that she had been bullied, quote unquote, no allegations were ever formalized, is because she was more of a conservative within the Labor Party. And so other members, people like Penny Wong, were accused of bullying her. Now, what conservative media has done is actually very similar to what the conspiracy theory movement has done with the death of this senator, is that they've taken, they're assuming causation. So in the perspective of the conspiracy theorists, they believe because she got vaccinated, that led to her having a heart attack. Conservative media, who are so desperate to attack Labor, have assumed that someone can be bullied into a heart attack and die. Me personally, I find these articles to be so disgusting because they are using the unfortunate, untimely death of a mother, of a person, of a political leader as an excuse to attack the opposition party. Anyone who has published articles on this should really hold their heads in shame, because it's absolutely disgusting using such a horrific, tragic thing in order to score political points. Now, if she was bullied in her workplace, then those allegations should be met and there should be some sort of resolution to them. That being said, she didn't feel the need while she was alive to raise those allegations. She didn't follow through on any formal processes. And it seems to be, what they colloquially refer to as a bit of a nothing burger.
Yeah.
We're also, we're living in a current era where the Liberal Party has been accused of covering up allegations of rape. They have stymied police investigations into corruption. The Friendly Geordies recently did an expose on a certain political figure and shows his ties to criminality. The Liberal Party at the moment goes from controversy to controversy, criminal controversy, I might add. Yet conservative media and media in general feel that these bullying allegations, which have not been substantiated, seem to warrant more media attention than genuine criminality. And as a true crime author myself, I am just sort of astounded at that. But any journalist, sorry, go ahead.
Just very quickly, do you think the because I think you pay attention to this a little bit more than I do. Do you think the media coverage on this bullying stuff, which is as can be considered to be a nothing burger, was more or of the same level as the rape allegations and the Brittany Higgins stuff that happened back then? Because for me, it feels equal, even though this is basically a nothing issue, right? What's your take on that?
I would agree with you. I think the media coverage on both issues has been, if not close to equal, substantial, I should say, rather, to the point where it has gotten to the point of ridiculousness. You are probably correct in having that perception of, hey, this seems that the Higgins coverage and this is nearly the same. We're now into week, I think it broke about 2 weeks ago now. I think was when the story first came up, and it's still making its way through the conservative news cycle. More moderate publications have sort of tapered off a little bit, but obviously, your conservative side of things, Sydney Morning Herald, Sky News, Channel 9 are still talking about it at the moment. The interesting side of it is, of course, the Labor Party is not going to talk about it. They're not mentioning it. And as far as political strategy goes, I think that's probably the best option at the moment, and let it just peter out. I think anything that anyone says is probably just going to continue to add fuel to those flames. But you are correct in the perception that it seems to be getting just as much coverage as a rape allegation. As someone who, and this is why I find it very preposterous, Tommy, as someone who, for most of my life, I was very overweight. I was a bullied child in high school, as many overweight kids are susceptible to bullying in high school. I'm still kicking, and according to my last set of heart tests, I'm still relatively healthy. So, I find the like just that causational link probably just goes to show how desperate the conservative movement is to try and get their boy re-elected. I think, the ridiculousness aside, and I'm curious as to what your take on this, I think it's probably a good sign that they are reaching this much.
Well, I mean, I think, like, I'm quite cynical, but my take on this is that this is just what right wingers do generally anyway. Like, they would do this no matter what, even if they were in a good position. This is still something that they would do. Whenever people die, they basically just completely destroy what that person stood for, and they'll use their messaging or whatever to for their own purposes. In America, they do that with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., and here we see it now. Like, the difference is they probably waited a little bit in America for the Martin Luther King stuff to die down, maybe, perhaps, but like, this is just like immediately, like, she wasn't even buried and they were going on the attack. And what I find, so for me, this is just the fact that they have this and the media is supporting them in such a way, like even the ABC to a certain extent, is concerning. So I can't really say that this is a good sign, because again, like, they reach, but they would be reaching anyway. And I think this goes to show that the Liberal Party, because Scott Morrison came out and he was all like, yeah, look at Albanese being weak and gutless and not answering up to the media or whatever. And I'm like, are you actually kidding me, considering how you handled the conduct under your own leadership in regards to sexual assaults and things like that? But it's also just a complete falsehood, because Albanese was out there on breakfast programs and all that kind of shit, and and it was very clear, it was very simple. He actually just addressed it. He was like, hey, so you want this extra, like, this external independent review process to come on board, but for what? What would they do? And no one ever is able to answer that question. And he basically goes, okay, so here's what went down, okay? So with the Penny Wong, like, I will address all of the actual points that you have. The Penny Wong stuff, she apologized to Kimberly Kitching while she was still alive, and that seemed to have been accepted. So a non-issue. Second, the tactics committee thing. People leave tactics committees all the goddamn time for all number of reasons, okay? And the third thing was basically just like, there wasn't actually a complaint, which was what you brought up. So then he's just like, so what would an external commission or an independent inquiry actually do? What would it be for? What questions does it answer that we haven't addressed already? Right? And so and that's the thing, is like, none of those were like talking points or just like hand waving or whatever. It was just talking about the things and bringing through the points and just going over it and being like, hey, your line of inquiry is bullshit. Like, there's no reason for you to be asking me these questions, because I've addressed all of the points.
Yep.
So
And
like,
and the
yeah,
the like what's really interesting about that too, is I like to sort of, I gauge public perception through friends and family. And one of my family members who I'll often engage with in political discussion, because he does have his finger on the pulse. He said to me, what do you think about it? And I said, well, what do you think about? I'd like to know how you feel about this. And he goes, well, I don't like people being bullied in their workplace. Will Labor address it? And Labor has addressed it, as you just mentioned, Tommy, but the media will not talk about it. The general media landscape in Australia won't give the Labor Party a chance to defend themselves or discuss the issue. It's
yeah, and
this,
even when they do bring them
this
on, like
cone of silence.
so I was watching ABC News Breakfast, and Michael Rowland was interviewing Anthony Albanese, and even when like they are brought on to like address those things, it's very hostile. Like in that line of questioning, he asked them, "Hey, like why isn't there like an independent review happening?" Anthony Albanese answered the question, and then Mike Rowland, like in a follow up, goes, "Yeah, but why isn't there an independent inquiry?" And then Albanese had to go in and like break it down step by step, and go, "Michael, mate, this is why. Like, come on, like this is why. Like, what are you doing?" So they're entering. It's not that they're not given an opportunity. It's just not listened to or taken in. And whenever they go on to these spaces, it's always hostile. I remember just throughout the day, I had ABC News on, and it was Albanese in Chris Bowen's seat, and they were just like, "Hey, check out this cool business thing. Like, let's this is what we have planned for this area or whatever." And 70% of the time that was spent there, they had to defend that point of the bullying allegations. And it's like, so how is the Labor Party meant to like tell you about their policies if they're just being drowned out constantly by this line of inquiry, which is fucking bullshit to begin with? Like, it's just ridiculous.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Look, it's not a great media landscape that we're living in this country. Information is not flowing to people correctly. And yeah, there is a conservative desperation right now to try and knock Labor out of this election. But I can see it. Like you said, it is traditional for media to ignore the Progressive Party in this country. And you can definitely see it that way. But maybe I do have a bit more optimism, and I am a little bit hopeful, but that the conservative movement is scared, and they're going to use anything and everything they can. I mean, you want to talk about bullying as well. Like, let's look at the Liberal Party for bullying. If you want an inquiry into political bullying, let's do a full-blown, well, even better yet, Tommy, let's have a federal ICAC that can look into corruption.
Yes.
That can look into shitty behavior. Yeah.
Like, I think that's one of the things.
Let's have an independent body.
I think that was a missed opportunity by Labor. So here's some Labor criticism for you people who think we're just going to be shills. I think one of the things that the Labor Party could have brought up here is just like, hey, yeah, if you want like an independent body to oversee these things, like we have processes in place, but if you don't trust that, okay, vote for us and we're going to put in an ICAC because the Liberal Party won't. Like, and I think that would be a super effective thing to deflect. Like, it probably it wouldn't work that well, but I think it would be. I think it's an extremely good line of rhetoric for this coming election, and integrity and processes are probably under the scrutiny more, especially with all the rorting and stuff that's going on. And so if you brought that up as a sort of like a defense for your own future policies, I think it's a really good deflection. But no one, as far as I was able to tell, was doing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing that hasn't been brought up, which I'm quite curious about, is remember the and actually, this could actually be quite a good bridge to our Jackie Lambie story. Remember a few years ago when Josh Frydenberg, our treasurer, there was an infamous photo taken of him speaking to a Liberal colleague who was terrified of talking to Scott Morrison, who was constantly being forced to have meetings with him, who was openly weeping in Parliament due to bullying. okay, media, if we're going to be fair and balanced, where are the comparisons to what the Liberal Party has been documented doing?
Yeah. But it's also just like, I mean, like even in, I don't remember that happening, but it sounds like excellent evidence. But just in recent memory, it's like, hey, do you remember how like someone was raped on their side of you know, like that speaks to the culture of you know, of their side of politics. Like there is no similar level of anything happening. Like that's the thing, is like they're crying about bullying in this instance, but people were raped on the Liberal side. So anyway, like it's just
if and when I bring up that stuff as well, Tommy, that wasn't that long ago. That occurred in 2021, the year 2021, and that was the reason that Liberal MP Julia Banks retired, and she referred to the Liberal Party as bully boys. That's what she called it. You know, those articles are all there. You can go check them out. But she was one of many who suggested that Scott Morrison tried to portray her as a weak pedal, quote unquote, when she decided not to recontest the next election. And she said, you know, it was the fact that she didn't feel that she could survive in the culture that the Liberal Party had created. That happened only last year when all of that came out. So that's something that's important to remember. If we're going to have fair and balanced, we have to have fair and balanced. But
we don't,
you know,
not even the ABC really in this instance.
No, absolutely not. But yeah, let's continue this discussion on bullying. Tommy, do you want to move on to what's been going on with Jackie Lambie?
Sure. So I think a little bit of we need to preface this a little bit, I think. So essentially, okay, what has happened over the last couple days? So like yesterday, I think, news broke of the government finally getting their deal done with the New Zealand government in terms of like us getting rid of a bunch of refugees that are living in Nauru or whatever, or like some kind of detention that we have set up, and we're basically just foisting them off to New Zealand, who are like, yeah, we'll take them because we're good at the geopolitics. And this was struck back in the Julia Gillard era, like when she was trying to strike this at the time, and it's taken 9 years for it to reach this point. And so there's just a little clip that I want to play, and it'll be. When I first watched this, I was like, okay, there's a press conference on this thing. And basically I was like, okay, how long is it going to take for this person to talk about Labor instead of their own accomplishments? Okay, let's see how long it takes them to do that.
Australia and New Zealand have jointly agreed today that New Zealand will resettle up to 150 refugees per year for 3 years from Australia's existing regional processing cohort. I'm so pleased that our two countries could reach this agreement, and I thank the New Zealand government for the constructive way that they have.
I will say this is good.
Australia and the constructive way
that this is happening.
Minister
I will say that.
from New Zealand has worked with me. The resettlement arrangement will be implemented under New Zealand's existing refugee quota program. This is New Zealand's sovereign process, and they will be managing that process. It is run very independently of Australia. Importantly, this arrangement will not apply to anyone who attempts an illegal maritime arrival or journey to Australia in the future. Australia's strong border protection policies have not changed. People who come to Australia illegally by boat will never be allowed to settle here. Anyone who breaches our borders will either be sent back.
So again, they're not talking about accomplishments, they're just fear-mongering.
We can't forget that these arrangements have only been necessary because of Labor's border policy failures.
There it is. a minute and 30 seconds before they were
Look
just
at
like,
that.
oh, Labour. I'm not going to bring it up because it's garbage from this point onwards. But it's just whinging about Labour for a good while there. But yeah, so this is the context in which the Jackie Lambie stuff sits. So yeah, Matt, if you want to take it away, what's the lowdown with Jackie Lambie? How is she involved in all of these shenanigans?
Yeah. So this is a complicated issue. About 9 years ago, New Zealand said, look, we don't want people in indefinite detention. If Australians are going to keep people in indefinite detention, we will make the offer to essentially take those refugees, right? I think, me personally, you don't hold people in prison without convicting them or trialing them, which is essentially what we did. So New Zealand said, hey, we'll take them on. And the Liberal government said, no, we're not going to do that. And the reason that they did that is because it is an election point. It's a xenophobic election point. It's a racist election point, but it does seem to win people over. You know, the idea of boats not coming to this country. The reason that we had a massive influx of refugees, sort of two reasons. The geopolitical one being that there was the quote unquote war on terror instigated by the Americans. And so that there was quite a large, refugee issue. There was also a lot of issues going on in India and Pakistan, and that's why we're seeing a lot of Pakistani refugees coming through. Under Kevin Rudd, they did relax our border policies, and the reason for that being that John Howard and his government had gone through the children overboard crisis, where people were killed, children were drowned. And so Kevin Rudd decided to ease back some of those restrictions, and then we saw an influx of refugees. Now, 9 years ago, essentially, New Zealand makes this offer. So Jackie Lambie comes into it because she's an independent, and when you have a healthy and diverse parliament system, you'll often have independent senators who don't either represent themselves or their own party, and they will be approached to assist on legislations. You know, they need to vote just like everyone else to push through legislation, both in the lower and upper house. It's a sign of a very healthy democracy. Now, Jackie Lambie was approached because there was a little thing popped up called the Medevac Bill. The idea behind the Medevac Bill was that when a refugee on one of our detention centres that's managed offshore, being Manus Island and Nauru being the most infamous two, what would happen is if that Medevac Bill had gone through, there would be a legal right for refugees to be treated in Australia. So if they had medical issues, they would be able to be brought here. And the reason that bill was proposed is because a refugee that was under our care, there's a lot of legalese that goes around this, but essentially the Australian government has washed its hands of legal responsibility, yet we keep these people in indefinite detention. One of the refugees had died of sepsis, and sepsis is essentially a blood infection. It's when you get a bacterial infection that enters your bloodstream, and then will go through the rest of your organs, and you'll end up dying from it. It's called sepsis. Jackie Lambie was going to vote in favour of a Medevac Bill, which would bring refugees from those islands to Australia, to mainland Australia, so that they could be treated medically. And she entered into a secret deal with Scott Morrison that basically said if she helped to throw out the Medevac legislation, that Scott Morrison would make good on the New Zealand refugee exchange, basically. Now, what is very interesting, and this is actually like, look, Jackie Lambie is someone who I didn't particularly like to start with in her political career, but she has willpower. She believes in what she's doing. She went in as a Palmer United party member, and is quickly left them and became an independent. She's a bit of a fighter, and I have a lot of respect for her on a lot of issues. So she went into this deal, and Morrison said, look, here it is in writing. It's now done and dusted, and I will announce this towards the end of my prime ministership. You know, the first term, I will absolutely get this across. But this is what is very interesting, is that during these negotiations, independent Tasmanian Senator Jackie Lambie has accused Scott Morrison of being intimidating and bullish during negotiations in the 2019 to resettle hundreds of refugees in New Zealand. Now, I'm reading this from the ABC article that Tommy has up now. Senator Lambie told Channel 9 she was told if she spoke about the deal before it was announced, it would kill it. And she was told she would face jail time if she revealed any of the details. So she said, for the sake of humanity, I had no other choice but to shut up anyway to make sure the job was done. And she also took extraordinary personal criticism. People likened her to Pauline Hanson. People said she was racist. She was xenophobic. When she took it, she took the public beating. And in the end, her bravery has helped get these people resettled, get them out of indefinite detention. And I think she needs to be applauded for that. But it's amazing that for the last 3 weeks, we've had coverage of bullying from the Labor Party. And then we're told a sitting senator is threatened with jail time should she announce this deal earlier.
Yeah.
Isn't that and that is horrendous. That is absolutely horrendous. Now, what's interesting about this is that the media is actually covering this. ABC is covering this. Conservative media is covering this, you know, particularly tabloid websites like news.com.au. It's too sensational not to talk about, and Jackie Lambie will talk about it. You know, she is going to discuss it openly and freely. So what do you think, Tommy, is going to be the political ramifications of this? Because it's complex.
Well, okay, so this is an article back in 2019 when I think this stuff was going down. There was a lot of criticism over Jackie Lambie and the state of democracy if these kinds of secret deals are able to be done by people. Because what's also interesting about all of this is that, you know, Labor obviously would support this bill, this bill of accepting New Zealand's terms, I guess, to take on these refugees. And it's like, if that was the case, then why would there need to be a secret wheeling and dealing going on? That's what I'm confused about. Like, why was this necessary to repeal this Medevac legislation and use that as a bargaining chip in order to get this other legislation, which has bipartisan support, through? Like, that's what's weird. Like, I don't... so in terms of, like, if the Liberal Party wanted to do the right thing, they would have just been upfront about it and said, hey, yeah, we can repeal the Medevac legislation because we are going to accept New Zealand's proposal. But that would have been a backflip on policy. That they were like, yeah, we're never going to do that, or something along those lines, which was stated in you know, this article here. So again, it's politics over it's the Liberal Party and them playing politics over the good of the people. Like, so this could have been done again, like if Labor was still in charge, it would have probably been done back when Julia Gillard was still in power. Or I mean, I guess that next term, if they would have remained in power. But like, this could have been done 2 years ago, 2 or 3 years ago.
Yep.
When this all was going down. But it wasn't, because they wanted to keep it in the back pocket for like fucking elections or some bullshit. Like, I just don't understand how this is good.
It's strange. It's really strange because there are sort of two things that you could see. Like, I honestly think the reason that they're being so quiet about it, so secretive about it, is because they probably didn't want to see an influx of refugees again. The line that is being peddled, and one of the last bastions of the coalition's, how do I put it? The last thing that they can dog whistle about to their conservative base is we stop the boats. I would imagine that there was fear within the Liberal Party that should they announce this deal and make it public, that there would be another influx of refugees, regardless of what they said. You know, there would have been an influx. I think that fear and hesitation probably worried them. I also think that the Liberals, we see it as a slam dunk, right? Because we're progressives. We see it as, okay, it's getting these people out of detention where they don't belong, getting them to a country that is happy to accept them, that is a first world country, that is going to resettle them. It's a great deal. That's how we saw it. It was the same when, you know, America also had a similar deal with us with resettlement. They took about 200 refugees, which was an old Obama deal that Trump did actually have to honor. So, you know, there is a element within the Liberal Party, there's an element within conservative politics that is racist, that is xenophobic. Could it be that they didn't want to upset those people? And could it be that the Liberal Party didn't want to see an influx of refugees at a crucial time when they should be out there politicking, trying to win the next election? Those are really the only two reasonable explanations I can think of, because, you know, I think when it comes to the Liberal Party, they don't see this as something that would help them in an election. They don't see this as a victory. They don't see this as a win. They see this as a necessary thing that they have to do. And I don't, honestly, I don't think they could see it as a win within their own conservative movement, man. That's my take on it.
One thing that quote unquote held up this legislation from being passed before or the deal being struck or something, was that they didn't want there to be any possibility of these refugees going to New Zealand and then somehow coming back to get citizenship in Australia. At the time, so in 2019, it didn't seem to be that big a deal about the further boat arrivals, because the general policy was that that wasn't going to happen. We were still going to stop boats that came in. This was just dealing with stop people who were already there. So they may say that, but that was never on the cards to begin with. You just stop the boats when they show up and just don't report them and just send them back. That's just how this stuff goes down. So the government was like, yo, we just don't want these guys that we've been neglecting and treating very poorly for the last however many years to want to come back to Australia, the place that has treated them so poorly. And it's like, why would they? There is no reason that they would do that. As a reason to hold up to the legislation, It just doesn't make sense. If you are a refugee in these fucking camps and struggling to survive and being like, yo, why the fuck is Australia doing this to us? And then you get told, hey, guess what? You get to go to New Zealand. Why the fuck would you want to go to Australia?
Yeah.
If that's the government that's treating you like that, it doesn't make any fucking sense.
Yeah.
But that's the line that they give. It's just bullshit. These fucking liberals, man. I don't.
Again, I think it just comes to xenophobia and dog whistling and racism. I think that's really the motivations there. I get that, but why are they bringing? Again, it's very sussy wussy. Why this is all getting brought up and all of this stuff is happening now, right? Why did it take again? Jackie Lambie in this this bullish thing or whatever, multiple times she was going to talk about it, because she was a year out from when she did the deal. She was like, I wanted to talk about it, but then COVID hit, and then I was like, oh, I better not. And she was like, I'm gonna keep it within myself, just so that I can get this through, which is a fair enough level of resolve. I don't begrudge her necessarily for doing that. But again, the government could have very easily done this when while the pandemic was going down. There was there's no reason they couldn't have done that necessarily. But it just seems weird that just before an election, they bring it out
and then in the press conference when they announce it, immediately attack Labor. And it brings up just the general strategy that these fucking people have, where it's just like, oh yeah, Labor are bad on borders. And that's it. And that's the reason why it's here. Like it may be a coincidence that this happened like now. It just feels really disingenuous. And it kind of annoys me that Jackie Lambie is like, oh yeah, thank the government for doing this stuff. It's like why wasn't it done like a year ago or whatever? Like why isn't it happening right now? That's the questions that I have about this kind of thing.
As soon as they had the option available to them, it should have been done. If I honestly think when a lot of these people end up resettling, I'm sure a lot of them are going to move into, the different educations. I'm sure some of them are going to end up lawyers. It will not surprise me if in 10, 20 years, these people actually sue the Australian government. And I think they're going to have the right to do it. Like the legal gray areas around this entire situation is just immense. They say, oh, a regular person on the street will go, hey, they broke the law. To which I would say, okay, well, where was their trial judge? Where was their lawyer? Where was their legal representation? You can't just hold people in indefinite detention. The fact that the Liberal Party is so weird with their messaging is very strange.
Is it that weird? It's just we're going to use it to attack Labor. That's it. Yeah. It seems like that's the messaging they want. Yep. Lindsay has actually commented. He says refugees information on their treatment gets out once they're in New Zealand. Maybe. Do you think that's likely?
Look, I think it will be. Like I just said there, where it comes to these people, will end up being. They'll move into different fields. They'll establish their lives. They will write books. They will do exposés. So I think Lindsay is 100% correct there. They will go to New Zealand. They are going to discuss it. The worst thing that could happen, I guess the Liberal government is maybe thinking decades ahead. They go to New Zealand. They get New Zealand citizenship. Once that happens, we have certain deals with New Zealand about like the free flow of visitors and labor between the two countries. Maybe they go to New Zealand, they become a citizen there, they come to Australia, they establish a life here, and then they just say, hey, this is how we were treated by the Australian government. Or even more so, maybe they are able to find a way to becoming an Australian citizen or permanent residence, which would then allow them to sue the government as well. Maybe that's what they're worried about, is potential litigation in the future. But it is going to come out. It is absolutely going to come out as soon as these refugees land. I don't know the specifics of the deals. I don't know whether they're going to have gag orders placed on them. But yeah, Australia is probably in for a bit of a beating with how we've treated these people. Since the Gillard era, it's crazy to think that some of these people have been in detention for a decade, nearly over a decade.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Not a fan of how this has been going on. But I think it's the government doesn't actually like doing things, and this is a thing that they could have done, and it hasn't happened.
Yeah. Conservatives do not progress anything ever. Yeah, there you go. Lindsay said it's
by definition,
Tasman travel arrangement that I was referring to there. Look, it's it was something that was very easy to accomplish, but the Liberal Party is not in the business of actually getting shit done.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I think we can move on to more sort of very recent news, and that's that the Solomon Islands. There's been some shenanigans going on there with them and the Chinese. So,
yep.
And this, I think it speaks to the inaction of the Liberal Party. But basically, what has been going on, I think, is that the Solomon Islands have been chilling. They've just been chilling over there in the Pacific, and as China wants to do, they're like, hey, we want to increase our tendrils across the planet and have soft power and all that other kind of stuff. And so the Solomon Islands, it seemed like there was some leak of some agreement or something that is being proposed between the two nations, and it's very concerning from an Australian security perspective because in those agreements, it's not just like infrastructural projects and that other kind of thing. There is potential for there to be a military base in the Solomon Islands. Now, when Scott Morrison was brought this news, he tried to like say that this is why you need us to remain in power because we're the only ones that are going to be like tough on China. And I'm like, bro, if you were like that good to the Pacific, they wouldn't have gone to China in the first place for this kind of deal.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, Tommy. You're 100% right about that.
So again, they're trying to like in the theme of this episode, they're trying to spin this in their favor to say, oh yeah, this is like a geopolitics issue that we can uniquely solve, and completely ignoring their track record on this stuff. But I'll let you go, Matt.
Yeah. So just a little bit of background on what China has been doing around the world is people may have heard discussion about the New Silk Road. Okay. And the New Silk Road, the idea of it is it's a sprawling network of trade, basically, where China is trying to influence governments all across the world and establish clear lines of trade back and forth. What it will allow them to do is be less dependent on the Western economy and essentially continue to build as an economic superpower in the world. That's essentially what they do. So what they'll do is they'll make arrangements with particular countries. They'll say, hey, if you let us come in here, we're going to build all this infrastructure for you. We're going to do it for free. You just have to essentially sign a loyalty pledge to us. It is essentially, visiting countries that are underdeveloped economically or need infrastructure assistance. So they come in and basically say, we're going to build it all for free, but you are now indebted to us permanently. And that's how they're doing it. How do you win the hearts and minds of people? Well, you build them shit and provide them services. It's pretty simple.
And it wouldn't hurt your geopolitical interests if you debt trap them in the process.
Absolutely. And debt trapping is the perfect term for this. That way, when it comes to places like the United Nations, you're able to push through a lot more because you're able to secure votes. It's a very geopolitical thing, and China has been doing it now for the last 10 years, last 20 years. It's been essentially their foreign policy. Go in, buy it up, debt trap, move on to the next point of call. When it comes to all of these islands, when it comes to our Pacific Islander friends, Australia has had for the longest time the ability to do exactly what China has done. We have had the opportunity to provide aid packages. We've had the opportunity to do charitable giving. The idea of a country sacrificing some of its GDP in order to bring infrastructure to developing communities, to people who need it. The idea behind that is you then help to secure your own nation. It's a really great way to also fight radicalization and terrorism. It's a great way to also help to foster education so that you're able to take on those people onto the mainland. If Solomon Islands suddenly has the ability to educate people, to give them degrees, we can then import some of that talent to our own country. There are many, many benefits in propping up nations that are around you. And one of those is, of course, having the ability to politically influence those countries. Australia doesn't get to turn around now and get upset about what China has done when we've had the option to do that for decades. One of the things that people often get up in arms about is like, we should be solving problems here before we give money to anybody else. But giving money to countries that are surrounding us allows us to have a more secure nation ourselves. And that's essentially what China has done in this regard. They just beat us to the punch, where we could have done this years and years ago. Our Pacific Islander friends are not happy with Australia. A few years ago, Peter Dutton was caught on a hot mic disparaging them, you know, talking about when the island, when they're going to be up to their, you know, their legs in water. I can't remember his specific comments, so I don't want to, you can go look it up. The articles.
Yeah,
are all there.
he
Maybe
did some offhand joke about climate change. It's like, you don't have that much time if the water's lapping at your feet or something. Which is super, like, and then, like, apparently, like, Morrison was like, oh, you know, watch out, there's a mic right above us. But it, you know, it was too late by then, they caught us. So Lindsay says this is 100% liberal fail when it comes to national security brought on by the Liberal Party's treatment of the Pacific. And I think this is, so this is one of those things, right, where leaders in the, like, you know, national security have probably been telling the government for a long time, you need to invest in these regions because, again, they form, in a lot of ways, the bulwark between us and China. So if you were to be tough on China, it's not enough just to say that you're tough on China. You need to, like, build up the countries around them, like the Solomon Islands, Thailand, etc., like all these places, so that you can actually have a bunch of, like, nations that will ally with you against China. But the Liberal Party don't want to actually invest in smaller nations or other people, right? The most that they'll do,
Absolutely.
and, like, to be so, like, to say that they haven't done anything is a bit disingenuous. They have sent the ADF into the Solomon Islands to deal with some uprisings and stuff like that. But the Pacific Island nations are concerned about climate change. And it is very clear on the global stage that our government is basically just giving them the middle finger, because it's like, hey, so the best thing you could do, Australia, for us is to mitigate climate change. And they just don't see that. And so it makes absolute sense that the Solomon Islands would be like, yeah, you know what? I'm not going to go with Australia because they're not good on climate, right? And Scott Morrison is someone who goes against all of his deals, right? So if you were to look at things objectively from their perspective, it's no wonder that they would go to China, because they would probably get more from China than they would get from us. Like, because we just don't invest, like, in terms of infrastructure and stuff like that. We'll send the troops in because that looks like being tough, but we won't do anything else. We won't build hospitals for them. So, like, it's absolutely, in terms of their geopolitical interest, it just makes sense. And so, again, like Lindsay said, this is 100% Liberal Party failure. They're going to try to spin it as China coming in and that you need a strong force. But China coming in is a result of their failures.
Absolutely. Absolutely it is. And the other part of it is as well is that the Liberal Party...
Hold on a second. Lindsay just posted the joke, so I will bring it up here.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there we go. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Dutton was involved in a conversation with Prime Minister Tony Abbott, who had just returned from a lengthy talks focused on climate change with Pacific Island leaders in Port Moresby in Papua New Guinea. Noting that today's meeting on Syrian refugees was running a bit late, Mr. Dutton remarked that it was running to Cape York time, to which Mr. Abbott replied, "We had a bit of that up in Port Moresby." Mr. Dutton then added, "Time doesn't mean anything when you're about to have water lapping at your door."
Yep.
Social Services Minister Scott Morrison then pointed out to both men out there, there was a microphone overhead.
Yep. And, you know, so when it comes to this Pacific Island, they know who they're dealing with. Of course, for them, you know, making a deal with China like this is not going to be beneficial.
In the long run, but like,
behind it. Yeah. You know, it isn't going to be beneficial to them, but you know, when you're faced with the choice of here is support, here is not support, you're going to go with the devil offering you the golden fiddle, aren't you? You know, if someone is not helping you at all, you're not going to deal with them. We've had decades to work with our Pacific Island friends, decades to do this. The other thing about it is the conservative movement within this country do not want to support other countries. at all. So they see any foreign spending as a negative.
Yeah.
So
they don't see the benefits in it at all. Yeah.
They don't see the benefits in it. So the Liberal Party is not incentivized by its own politics, its own movement, to try and to get involved in these different countries. And the sad thing for this country is that as far as the last 30 years have gone, we generally have not had progressive government that would actually make these sort of decisions. And so it does fall to the Australian people here who continue to vote again and again and again for conservative movements. They aren't going to support our neighbours, and we need to support our neighbours because, those blanket of islands and New Zealand, a bigger island, of course, in a country. If we support our neighbours, we can actually build a very strong presence, a very secure presence in our particular region. But while we continue to act in the way we do, China is simply going to move through all of these different countries. New Zealand is included in that. China offers a lot of deals and a lot of incentives to New Zealand all the time. And considering our relationship with New Zealand, where we will take someone who was born in this country, who is technically a New Zealand citizen, and then as soon as they commit a crime, we'll export them straight back to New Zealand. We treat everyone like shit in our own region, and we wonder why China has such a strong presence here. You don't need to wonder why, honestly. We keep treating our neighbors like shit. This is what it looks like. And yeah, climate change is going to be the big one. Only this week, we saw massive heat spikes on both sides of the Arctic Circle, both at the North Pole and South Pole. Climate change is here. It is real, and it is going to cause catastrophe for these smaller islands. They could be losing massive amounts of physical land, and the fact that we are, we have no involvement in that discussion. We don't do anything to try and help. That definitely sends a signal to our Pacific Islander friends. It really does. Yeah.
Just to cap this off, so one thing that I found interesting, I can't remember exactly where I read it, but there was talk about how there was an opinion piece somewhere where they were like, hey, so Scott Morrison will talk about being aggressive against China. And one of the things that you can do to do that, which is generally pretty good, is to have the reason why we'd want those nuclear submarines is that they allow the submarines to operate at further ranges. So we could have them pushed out closer to China and to stop them from being able to encroach further onto Australian territory, right? But if the Solomon Island base, the Chinese base in the Solomon Islands, as is potentially in the draft, gets set up, then the submarines are kind of useless at that point. So this is actually a huge deal that I don't know whether it's going to be addressed. It is kind of scary if China does get that base up there, and it restricts certain levels of potential movement in terms of trade and everything else as well if things do get a bit heated in that area. So that is of massive concern, and the fact that this is happening at all is a massive failure of the Liberal Party. And is indicative of them in general. Even if there was some kind of deal that we had struck with them, our leader is Scott Morrison. He went back on the French submarine deal. He very recently lied to Bob Katter about what he was going to do in terms of the dam that was going to be built in that area. They're just liars, and they'll go back on anything if it suits their political agenda. And so there's no reason from the Solomon Islands point of view to trust us. And that's what happens when you have leadership that is this disingenuous. Your trust just erodes, and it's why would they not go to China?
Exactly right. And Australia is also bringing up the deal with America. Australia is not an innocent player in all of this stuff either. We have American military bases. We've got one in Darwin. We have the Pine Gap surveillance center as well. Australia has anti-China interests here. Our military, for example, is not well organized. It's underfunded. It's underutilized. It's under-resourced. And, you know, when it comes to our defense minister, that being Peter Dutton, he's more interested in making sure that Australian defense personnel can't wear rainbow flags in support of the LGBTQI community. And he's also interested in making sure that they can't have fundraising morning teas for LGBT troops. That is what Peter Dutton is concerned about. He's not concerned about the security of this country. If we want to be concerned about the security of this country, what we should be doing is making sure that our defense forces are trained properly, that they have, adequate resources, and there are options for Australia which
bolster the Pacific region.
Aggressive. Yeah, exactly. We could bolster the Pacific region.
They again, like they are in many ways. I mean, this is going to be very like sort of dehumanizing of that region, but if you're going to talk purely about Australia's strategic interests, they act as our shield against China.
Yep.
In many ways. So like a talk of an invasion with Australia is fucking ridiculous because of the land that you'd have to take and and you're like surrounded by sea, right? But if you got all the other regions before then, it's a different story entirely. So we should be helping them out, not just because it's good for people and humanity and all that other kind of stuff, but it actually also has the side benefit of having them side with us against China. So
yeah, absolutely. Like Australia is in one of the most vulnerable defense situations that we have ever been ever. The fact that the Liberal Party is campaigning on Reds under the bed and they're specifically aiming at China, which is one of Australia's largest trade partners, is going to be a disaster for us. Like you said, Tommy, bolstering a defensive agreement with our islander nations, with New Zealand, would be our best defense, and it would be seen as a very passive thing. We don't need to build missile silos. We don't need to have defense systems. We don't need to have American bases in Australia. But what we absolutely could have is a very, very strong Pacific Island agreement and defensive agreement. And how do we do that? By building hospitals and schools.
Yeah. Scott Morrison always talks about the Pacific Island as family. And I'm just wondering what kind of like family member he would be if this was like a legitimate, if this is how they treat the Solomon Islands, how does he treat other family members? Because that's pretty neglectful, I would say.
Yep. 100% agree with you on that, Tommy. So to wrap it up though, we've probably got some good news. I'd like to go out on some good news.
Yeah.
So we should let's have a chat about Labor's absolute pantsing of the Liberal Party in South Australia.
It's never framed as a pantsing though. There was no talking about like landslides or anything like that. It just seemed like, oh yeah, they won, I guess. That was the impression that I got, like looking at the media space about this. But yeah, Matt, what went down in South Australia?
All right. So Peter Malinauskas, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's now going to become the Premier as Labor pulls off stunning victory South Australia, according to the ABC. So the reason that it should be considered a shock victory is for two big reasons. Number one, the Liberal Premier of South Australia was actually not doing too bad a job. He had a pretty good approval rating, and for most South Australians, they did actually feel that he was doing a relatively good job.
Yeah, he closed the borders and all that during the pandemic.
Yeah, exactly. They actually thought he did pretty good in his COVID response. The other side of this is that South Australia has, for the longest time, been considered a Liberal stronghold. So if you look at those two things, it is not really an indictment on the South Australian government. It is an indictment on the federal government. And the reason that media isn't talking about this or not talking about it in the way they should is because of something that we've presented time and time again on this stream. There is a media bias towards Labor. Now, they should be absolutely terrified by this. It is going to, like, there have been all these little elections. There have been bigger state elections where the Liberal Party is constantly being shut down state by state by state. As far as state governments go now, there are only 2 Liberal Party states left, that one being New South Wales and Tasmania. And I guarantee when we go to the state election for New South Wales will turn red.
You think so? That's a bold call, dude.
I think so. Like, I think even when you look at, like, New South Wales is very complicated because New South Wales has Sydney, which is considered progressive, but it also has rural New South Wales, which is considered very conservative, especially when it comes to social issues. That being said, I honestly do believe that considering the absolute failure of 2 Liberal governments, one being the Gladys, the Barragigliani government, and now the Petrok government, I honestly believe that it will turn red in the next state election. So it should be ringing those alarm bells for the federal government that they are probably going to be losing this election. I happen to think that at this point in time, the Liberal power brokers know that they're going to lose the election. They're happy to get rid of Scott Morrison. And then over the next 3 years, they're going to start building up Peter Dutton as the next leader of the Liberal Party. But it is very, very interesting that there really was no discussion about just how detrimental the loss of South Australia is going to be to the federal government. No one wanted to talk about it in the terms that we're going to discuss it. So what's your take, Tommy?
I don't know. I think, the South Australia stuff, I think is, like, I think it'd be hard to disagree with the assessment that this is the federal sphere affecting the state politics. Because if we were to look at other states like Western Australia and Queensland, this is the first one where a state premier has been overthrown during the pandemic season, I guess, or the pandemic era. So, and he did all of the stuff that the other ones did in terms of like political acceptance or like your general acceptance among the community. So this seems to be, I would agree that it's a dissatisfaction that the South Australian people have with the Liberal Party in general, and they're taking it out on the Liberal Party locally. Although there could be a bunch of local issues that we are not all that aware of. Like, I know that there was some issues with hospitals and like the response time of ambulances and things like that, or something along those lines. But that was an issue that I think was fairly brought up, where it was like that's both a Labor and a Liberal Party failing.
Oh, absolutely. Like, if you look at healthcare around this country at the moment, it's been past breaking point already, and it is past breaking point with both Labor and Liberal governments all across this country. Victoria, which is currently Labor, have had horrendous times with getting ambulances to people who need them. Healthcare systems all around this country are failing. That's a very interesting thing. Like, for local governments, like hospitals and healthcare are a major concern. But it's like, if you're not getting money from the federal government, like as a local government, what are you going to do? Right? So local governments are in a really hard issue when it comes to that. But yeah, like, I don't on federal news, I don't remember hearing much else locally that was problematic for the Liberal Party there. So well, you look at what Mr. Malinauskas, I do hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Malinauskas. Let's look at his campaigning strategy. What was he talking about? Investment in education, investment in training, investment in skills, clean energy, healthcare. Discussing that this is the Reconstruction era, building something new, building something better. That's what people want these days. He said themselves, is like, this generation realized the opportunity of a clean energy future and all the jobs it can provide. So if he was campaigning on clean energy and, federal government goes, no one wants that, we're not going to campaign on it, we're not going to talk about it. Well, sorry, these people are getting elected on these platforms.
Yeah, he did say that as well. Like in some respect, he was like, it's his election campaign proves that, well, this is what he said. He proves that you can go off on visions and off policy and all that other kind of stuff. But I'm like, dude, it didn't work last time. That's all I'm saying. It didn't work last time. So I think it worked in this instance for sure. And maybe it's just you need enough time for the Liberal Party to show their ass for you to be like, oh yeah, okay. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
but it's good.
Honestly, if you're a Liberal Party voter right now, and look, I'm not going to tell you who to vote for. I'm going to tell you who I'm going to vote for and the reasons why, and that's progressive parties who are actually going to bring infrastructure, who are going to invest in education, healthcare, and the working class. That's who I'm going to vote for. But if you're a conservative Liberal voter right now, what have they done for you in the last 3 years? If you can turn around and say one benefit to your life that the Liberal Party have brought to you.
Let's be real. Let's be real here, Matt. Like the last 3 years, you can always hand wave by saying, yeah, it's a pandemic. Come on. But they've been in power the last 9.
Yeah. They've been in power.
Like that's a long time. That's almost a decade of them in power. What have they done?
But that's an interesting point you just bring up, Tommy. I'll just touch on it very briefly before we end this out on the polls. But shouldn't a government in a time of crisis be the most effective government that you can see? Like when the
if they were good,
when the chips are on the table, shouldn't that be the time where maybe a mediocre government springs to action and says, you know what, we've got this, we can help you, we're going to do a good job, we're going to stop being dickheads, we're going to work for the people, we're going to stop being so partisan, we're going to work with our opposition to make sure that the Australian people are looked after? Isn't that the absolute essential time from not only a human standpoint where, we're improving people's lives, but also a standpoint of like, fuck, man, if we nail this, we can win the next election hands down.
Yeah, but that requires work. You need to work to do that. That's the problem.
Yeah.
And again, and it goes, and you might say that, yeah, that might work out for you in terms of you getting reelected, but how does that affect your wallet? How can you be corrupt and do that? And that's what these guys do, right? So again, like when they did, during the pandemic, when they did JobKeeper, it wasn't them just giving your average punter money. It was, massive corporations, here's some money. It lines the pockets of them and their mates, not the people. So when they do something, it's for their own self-interest in terms of profits and being corrupt and shit, rather than working for the people. So you would think if it was a good government that was, wanted a better Australia, then they would have taken this opportunity, never waste a crisis, because you're in a disruption. You may as well use that as an opportunity to just build, but they don't because they're shit and all that.
Like three things, and I honestly believe that the Libs will lose this next election. I honestly do. I don't see how they can win a federal election at this point. 3 separate crises that could have guaranteed them strong, good election results. Making sure that the Rural Fire Service was supported during the worst bushfires this country has ever seen. Handling the COVID crisis appropriately, on time and efficiently. And then at the very end, making sure that the people who are in those flood-affected areas got the support and assistance that they needed. And then making sure that when it comes to the victims of flooding, when it comes to the victims of bushfires, that both of those groups of people have the adequate financial support that they're going to need to rebuild. Right? 3 easy things to manage if you're not a complete fucking idiot. which I don't believe anyone within the Liberal Party right now isn't a complete fucking idiot, because all of those things are very easy to do, and they would have secured them the next election. If Scott Morrison honestly wanted to win the next election, he wouldn't have gone to Hawaii during Australia's worst bushfire crisis. He would have opened up the checkbook to make sure that we had firefighting vehicles ready to go, had helicopters ready to go, had our bombing fleet, water bombing fleet ready to go. Easy victories, like blind Freddy.
No. Okay, Matt, wait, hold on a second. You say they're easy, but all of this requires you to like sit down and listen to the bodies that are like, hey, a bad thing is going to happen. And it requires you to listen to them and be like, I agree, and then put the money and do the things.
Yep.
And to say that is easy for these motherfuckers, I don't know, dude. I think it seems monumental because they can't seem to do it. Every single time one of these things happens, everyone's like, hey, this thing is going to happen. Maybe you should do something about it. Nothing ever gets done.
They are their own worst enemies. And you know, one of the things that Lindsay just commented there is that the Libs now know they need to move away from alt-right politics. The Trump era affected all of us. It affected the entire world.
Oh.
And
there are still anti-vax protesters in Canberra. Still. I couldn't even believe it.
And anyway, I'm just reading a very good book at the moment called QAnon, The Rise of the First Internet Cult. And it talks about, you know, the inception of like this crazed form of alt-right politics, where essentially internet LARPers, you know, created this crazed conspiracy that involves, you know, reptilians feeding on babies' blood and all of this sort of stuff. And the Trump government didn't condemn them and then quietly dog whistle to them and so on and so forth. Our own Prime Minister's mate was deeply involved in the QAnon conspiracy, to the point where
that Hillsong guy or a different guy?
No, this talk about Hillsong. Where I'm waiting for more information to come on that. That'll probably be something we talk about on the next stream.
Yeah, sure. Sorry.
This dude was a mate of Jenny and Scott Morrison's. It's covered in that book, QAnon, The Rise of the Internet Cult. He was talking to Scott Morrison, and he said, you know, look, I want you to say ritualize sexual abuse in a speech. And Morrison put it in there. It is my firm belief that due to the Trump era of politics, conservative governments thought that they had a golden ticket to be the absolute corrupt dictators that they've always wanted to be. You know, where they don't get anything done, where they just rort us for our money, where they grow fat off kickbacks and slush funds. And I think that the Morrison government thought that that was going to be their future. And I think they were shocked that the world has now started to rebel against that future. You know, and I think that it leads to, I think that is the explanation for why they've been so pathetic when it comes to handling all of this. Because honestly, if you look at some of the past Liberal governments during times of crisis, they have acted. And when I say past Liberal governments, I'm not talking Tony, Turnbull, or Morrison. I'm talking John Howard and specifically his gun control reform back in the 1990s. They used a crisis, never, like you said, Tommy, never not use a crisis. The Howard government used a crisis and it got them reelected.
Okay, so just real quick. Okay, we need to move on and finish this show off. But to be fair to Malcolm Turnbull, he was going to side with Labor on the emissions trading scheme, and that's why he was ousted. And so the ramification for that, we're feeling that shit now. Yeah. Especially with these oil prices and whatnot. And so that'll lead us to the polls.
Yes.
And the ALP increases its lead over the LNP as petrol prices spike well above $2 per litre. 58% to the LNP's 42%.
Petrol
Matt, what
prices...
did you want to talk about when it comes to the polls?
Yeah, so obviously, and I think we're probably going to do this every stream now leading towards the election. I think the polling data is important here. What's really interesting is that in the last election, there was a sort of like, you know, they said Bill Shorten was the preferred leader, the Labor Party was the preferred party, and the polls actually proved pretty disastrous. What's interesting this time is that when it comes to the petrol price increase, which is essentially translates to cost of living increase, you can see that there is a massive jump towards Labor, right? You know, we're seeing the points go up towards Labor. So that feels to me like there's more of a real world viewpoint on this polling data, as opposed to what we see sometimes, which is people say that they're going to be progressive, but they're actually conservative. They just don't want people to think that they're a shithead. So they actually answer polls incorrectly. You know, they're not very truthful about it. We saw that during the American election when Donald Trump was elected.
Yeah. So just real quick, Matt, like this ratio, like 58% to 42%. It's never been that wide though, right? Like in the last bunch of elections, especially the last one, it was always much closer, right? But the sentiment seemed to be that Labour was going to win, right? Or am I wrong?
Yep. No, you are correct. That is substantial. So let's say, just for argument's sake, we knock off a couple of points there. So it's like, you know, if you look at polling data that goes, okay, 48% says they will vote for this party, and 52% say that they're going to vote for this party. That's pointless, right? You can nearly say, well, it's really anyone's election, or maybe it's more, it's favoring the incumbent. That is a very, very substantial lead that the Labor Party has in that polls. And the fact that it is off the back of petrol price increases means that we can actually see a real world consequence. And that makes this a little bit different, you know, because that is, it's basically suggesting that inflation is possibly going to dictate who wins this next election. And when cost of living increases, it's not the opposition party's fault. It is always the party in power. And so that's why I think this polling is very, very significant. And the fact that there is such a gap, Lindsay mentions it there, Labor lost the last election and the poll was way, way closer. And they only just lost. I think
that's something that should that should always be factored in. Like Labor didn't lose by much in that election. Like they lost it, but yeah.
I think we're going to continue to see petrol prices spike. One of the growing sentiments at the moment is the Labor Party had a plan for an electric vehicle industry 3 years ago. If that had been initiated, a lot of Australians wouldn't be feeling the pinch at the pump as much as they are right now. The Liberal Party has very little interest in renewables, very little interest in electric vehicles or hydrogen-powered vehicles. They're firm on oil, fossil fuels, coal power, and now it is hurting people. On top of that, Lindsay, again in the chat, mentions that there has been no wage growth right now, and he is 100% correct. There has been no wage growth. So we're fighting inflation. We've seen no wage growth, and we've also seen as working class that the Liberal Party, they want to reduce penalty rates. They want to reduce public holidays. They want you to be working 24/7, and they want you to be paid less for it. That is why this poll is so in favor of a Labor government. And I think if they're not paying attention to the polling data, they're absolute morons. Now, this comes to us via the Roy Morgan poll as well. Roy Morgan is, they've been in this business for a long time. Generally speaking, they get their numbers, they get their numbers correct. And this should be ringing alarm bells to federal Liberal Party members that none of their seats are safe.
Yeah, one can only hope.
Because
we don't need any semblance of them around at this point.
No, and I think once we get to this election, and look, Morrison still hasn't fucking called it, which is crazy.
No, I mean, I think it makes sense. Like, there's been scandal after scandal, and none of the news that ever comes out is in his favor. So he's wanting to, he's waiting for a point in time. I assume it's going to be right after the budget where he can set the terms, because before then, people were like, oh, is he going to call it like early on next year? And the reason why he didn't was because stuff like the floods happened. So that's my speculation on that, at least, anyway.
He's got till September, and I don't see the Liberal Party being able to pull out anything in the next budget. Like, the Liberals are going to do what they always
September.
do.
I mean, I thought it has to be done before May, or I mean,
yeah. Sorry, I misspoke there, but yeah, they have to call it, and we'll probably be going to the polls in September.
Right.
The thing here is that the Liberal Party is going to do one thing that they always do, and that is that they're going to offer cash. Right? We're going to give you cash. They're going to announce probably $1,000 extra for everyone at tax time to stimulate the economy. They're probably going to talk about, more increases to family bonuses. They're probably going to turn around and also talk about, more tax offsets for people earning $100,000 a year. What they won't talk about is increasing the dole payments for people on welfare. What they're not going to talk about is increasing pension. And that's what people in this country are going to desperately need, because how, Tommy, are you going to be able to go out and try and find a job if it's going to cost you $50 to put fuel in your tank just to get down the road?
Yeah, it's hard.
How? It's impossible. How is a pensioner going to be able to survive on their current pension when they also are now going to have to offset the rising prices of fuel?
Yeah, I mean, it's not just fuel, but like, because our entire transport industry relies on fuel, and if the cost of that goes up, the cost of what they deliver, which is basically everything, also goes up. So, again, I think they had something about baked beans or something on the news, how it's going to cost more, which, yeah, it would be good if we had like a fleet of, maybe electric trucks or some shit that could have been, been brought in 10 years ago or whatever.
Yep, we could have offset a lot of these costs that we're now facing. The war in Ukraine looks like it will continue indefinitely at this point, which also means that we're going to see, increased costs when it comes to items that we export out of the Ukraine. People may not think we export a lot, but the reason that your Maggi 2-minute noodles are going up is because, wheat is exported from the Ukraine, and people are now feeling that. So the next 3 years,
even if we don't get any trade directly from them. Yeah, sorry, Matt. Even if we don't get any trade directly from Ukraine, the effect they have on markets, because they export so much grain, and with Russian oil, and if you factor in the Russian oil getting blocked off, the effect that they have on markets is that since they don't exist, the prices of the rest of the markets will go up, because there's not enough supply to meet the demand, so prices go up.
Absolutely. And as people feel that squeeze, they feel that pinch, I think it's going to affect the Morrison government. They've already discussed the idea of reducing the fuel levy. There's 44% of the money that you spend at the petrol pump goes straight to the government, which I have no issue with taxes, but in an emergency situation, why not cut that levy in half and at least provide some sort of relief? Again, it's a slam dunk. Honestly,
yeah,
they could.
Is there any reason why they haven't just try to rush that through now?
There's discussion about it, but we haven't actually seen it happen. I went to the fuel pump the other day, $2.01.
Yeah, I mean, I was talking
in my life.
Yeah, I was talking to Josh, and he's like, yeah, it's like 100. He has to spend to fill up his tank. It's like $120. He does a lot of driving, and he has like a V8, which he bought, way back when fuel prices were reasonable. And he was like, yeah, it's $120 And then he paused and he's like, a week. And I'm like, holy shit.
Yep.
That's insane, man. Like that's like a third or a quarter of rent just to travel, just to like initiate jobs, doing a job and paying off your rent. Like that's crazy, man. Like I don't.
You know, and in Canberra as well. Like you look at those numbers, $120 to fill your tank up a week, $350 to pay your rent once a week, right? Already there, you know, you're nearly looking at $500, and that's two everyday items that you need, two essentials: being able to travel and being able to put a roof over your head. How is anyone going to be able to live under those conditions? And then when you're going to the supermarket, you're also paying the inflation there.
Yeah.
You know, it's horrendous. And honestly, I think it is it has to be a contributing factor to that poor polling. It absolutely has to be. You know, I'll leave you with one anecdote as we wrap this up as well, talking about fuel prices. As I was filling up at the pump, I happened to catch the eye of a business owner, their business being a tow truck. They just filled it up. He looked at me and he goes, "I nearly had a heart attack." And I said, "How much did it cost you?" And he said, $785 to fill up his tow truck, right? That's, and these people, they're independent. They own one truck. They're out there trying to make a living. And that money is directly cutting into their profits. So if you say you're a friend of the small business owner, well, I had a small business owner that looked like he was about to kill himself. I didn't say anything to this guy. He just started talking to me because I feel like he just needed to vent.
Yeah.
You know, if you're a friend of the small business owner, I don't see it. Yeah. I honestly don't. And speaking with business owners who are absolutely struggling with fuel prices right now, that is not an isolated example. Another family member of mine has a very successful contracting business, and he has been saying the exact same thing. These fuel prices are killing us, and they're going to keep killing small businesses because it's hard enough to operate in the current economy without having to also worry about increasing fuel prices, which are increasing your transit prices. If you're a small business that relies on getting products from one spot to the other, you are now desperately hurting, and the Liberal Party has not sent any relief to our small businesses who have been absolutely struggling for the last 3 years. So if you're a small business owner, do not vote Liberal. If you're a medium business owner, do not vote Liberal, because they are not in the business of helping you.
Yeah. The right wing will tell you that it's the Greens' fault, the Greenies, the leftists' fault that this is happening because they want you to stop drilling for oil. But it's like, hey, bros, the left wanted electric vehicles and electric trucks and shit, which would have meant that we would have been completely not dependent on the petrol price for everyday living and expenses and stuff like that. So
absolutely,
they will tell you that, but don't forget there's another step in that argument where you don't even need to fucking think about petrol prices if all your fleet of trucks and stuff are electric. So
if the Shorten government had gotten in 4 years ago and have done what they said they were going to do, which was bring an electric car industry to this country, people would have an option at the moment of Australian-produced electric cars, Australian-produced clean hydrogen cars, fleets of electric transportation vehicles, and possibly a rail system as well, which all would have mitigated the costs that we're now facing now. But because of a couple of dinosaurs who have decided that this is how it has to be, we're now in a situation where all of us are making cuts. In my household alone, we are making cuts. You know, at our local supermarket, where we're dropping dollars that translate to real wages, we have made cutbacks just so that we're able to be comfortable. Yeah. We're not going to the cinema. We're not going to. I have as you can see behind me, I have a massive movie collection. I'm not buying movies like I used to, which supports local business. I'm not going to cinemas which support local business. And the only thing that I've kept up that I can barely afford, honestly, is my monthly comic book pickup. And I believe in supporting that small business so much that it is one of the very last things that I'm going to cut. But that could very well be something that I cut out of my personal budget. You know,
Yeah.
we've got to support small businesses, but the federal government is not interested in that. And that's probably where I'll leave it today.
Yep. Get them out. Get them out of here, boys and goyles and NBs.
Yep. We have a choice. I'll do a bit of plugging just before I head off, Tom.
Keep it quick.
I'll keep it quick. So if you want to check out some of my other work, the Weird Crap in Australia podcast, which I host with my my lovely wife and researcher extraordinaire, Holly Soul. We release an episode every week. You can get that on any podcast platform that you choose. We also have 2 books out at the moment, Weird Crap in Australia, Volume 1 and 2, which you can pick up from lulu.com and from impactcomics.com.au. And we also have Volume 3 currently being revised for its 3rd time for a release in September. So if you could support those, that would mean the world to me. And follow me on the socials, Weird Crap in Australia on Facebook and Instagram, and on Twitter. Our handle is @WeirdCrapInOz. So please shoot me a message. Love to chat politics with anyone and everyone.
Nice. Yeah, so thanks everyone for watching the stream. If you could do us a favor and do, the likes, etc., that would be a great help. Lindsay, shout out to Lindsay, who's been chatting with us in YouTube chat. It's been cool to have action on that little box. So that's been neat.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
So yeah, we're gonna try to do this every week. That is the goal on a Saturday at around 12 p.m. So tune in, help us out, watch it next week, and then chat with us and Lindsay, hopefully.
Yeah.
So,
and
thanks for watching.
Share it around.
Yeah, that too. That would be great. But yeah, I hope everyone has a good day. See you next week.
Bye for now.